While Guyana rockets to fame with oil barrels and billions, Jamaica chose a harder road: discipline, sacrifice, and reform. No oil jackpot, no sudden boom, just grit. And after decades of economic struggle, something remarkable happened. Jamaica slashed its national debt in half, reined in inflation, and built a reputation for stability. Quietly, but powerfully. So how did Jamaica pull it off? And what does it mean for the region?
Madam Speaker, perhaps one of the most remarkable indicators of our economic transformation is our debt-to-GDP ratio, which has fallen from unprecedented levels. When my administration took office, the debt-to-GDP ratio was over 120%. It is now approximately 68.7%, and we are on track to meet our target of 60% by March 2028. It is important, especially for young Jamaicans, to understand the roots of our debt crisis. Jamaica faced two major periods of debt distress. The first, from the 1970s to the late 1980s. And this was driven by two global oil price shocks, a failed experiment with democratic socialism, a global recession that slashed bauxite revenues, and Hurricanes Allen and Gilbert in 1980 and 1988 respectively. The second period of debt distress was from the 1990s to the late 2010s. And it stemmed largely from the PNP's policy during the FINSAC era, which collapsed financial institutions, wiped out the business class, and triggered a prolonged recession worsened by the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis. In the mid-1990s, Jamaica faced a financial sector collapse of a number of financial institutions. The financial sector meltdown was not caused by any exogenous, meaning outside shocks or global crisis. In fact, the US, our major trading partner, had robust growth in the 1990s, averaging 3.4% per annum. This was purely caused by bad government, bad policy choices, and poor superintendence of the economy. Listen to me clearly, members. FINSAC was a homegrown domestic crisis wholly caused by the PNP, for which we are now only just recovering. Our debt to GDP prior to the advent of the FINSAC crisis was 72%. The government at the time established FINSAC to bail out the collapsed financial institutions. This bailout cost the country 42% of GDP. In other words, 42% of what we produce in any 1 year, we had to take it to pay for FINSAC. By way of comparison, the US government's bailout intervention during the global financial crisis of 2008-2009 was only 9% of their GDP. So you see the magnitude of the scale of FINSAC relative to the size of our economy. Within 6 years after the establishment of FINSAC, our debt spiraled out of control from 72% of GDP to 130% of GDP. almost doubling. That caused interest costs alone on the debt to consume almost 70% of tax revenues. So just the cost to pay for the debt, the interest, at one point cost us 70% of all the tax revenues that we collect. Madam Speaker, the root cause of the crisis, the FINSAC crisis, was the premature policy decisions of the PNP to liberalize the foreign exchange market in 1991 without the necessary preconditions such as reserves in place. In other words, they went to party but didn't have any money. This triggered a rapid depreciation of the Jamaican dollar and skyrocketing prices, with inflation reaching 80% in 1991 and 40% in 1992. Not having any rent money to ward off speculators, the government then tried to protect the exchange rate through exorbitant interest rates. As a result, productive enterprises, especially small businesses, were unable to service their loans, and the loans became non-performing. Mounting non-performing loans and loan defaults then caused banks to collapse. Madam Speaker, the PNP's high interest rate policy created a two-tiered economy. One where cash-rich speculators thrived while productive businesses drowned in insurmountable debt. This led to what a prominent member of the PNP described as the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich since slavery.
No black gold, just bold moves. Unlike its oil-rich counterpart, Jamaica had no sudden resource windfall to bail it out. In 2013, with public debt peaking at a crushing 144% of GDP, the country was teetering on the edge. Default was a real threat. Investors were nervous, and every day, Jamaicans were bearing the brunt. But instead of folding, Jamaica launched one of the most disciplined economic turnarounds in the modern Caribbean. Jamaica began a painful but focused climb out of the crisis through structural reforms, fiscal tightening, and shared sacrifice. And it worked. Prime Minister Andrew Holness tracked the journey in his recent budget presentation to Parliament. How did Jamaica turn things around? The secret weapon: consistency and commitment. Jamaica introduced a fiscal responsibility law, set up an independent fiscal council, and empowered the Bank of Jamaica with inflation-targeting authority. These weren't just policies, they were systemic safeguards to protect against political interference and short-term thinking. Here's what followed. Primary budget surpluses year after year. Institutional reforms across tax, customs, and public sector pay. Public-private partnerships to drive infrastructure without exploding debt. Broad social partnerships where citizens and businesses bought into the national vision. It wasn't flashy, but it was transformational.